Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back to science. All right, in 14.4, we are looking at hemostasis. Hemo, referring to blood, and stasis, referring to kind of the homeostasis side, where we're trying to maintain a stable internal environment. This whole goal is to stop the bleed. So you're familiar with stop the bleed, possibly as a mechanism, which is important. But let's look at the actual cellular side of it, the physiology of how this occurs. So there are three main focuses that are going to happen here. One is the blood vessel spasm. So the blood vessel is going to be able to contract, reducing blood flow to it. This is an overview. The platelet plug. So where there is a break, there's going to be ultimately a stop there. At that point, the blood is going to have coagulation. These three things are going to help a normal, let's say, capillary where it's broken. And most of our vessels that are broken are going to be capillaries. So let's look at the vascular spasm. So, vascular spasm, you're probably thinking of a leg spasm or muscle spasm in general. And this refers to the choking off of supply of blood. So, imagine you have a network of fibers, and in those fibers, you have fluid flowing through them. Let's say that this one breaks off. Where my ring is, if it could constrict and stop blood flow to this area, that would be representing this vascular spasm. Vascular is referring to a vessel, a blood vessel. And so vascular spasm is cutting off that blood supply. And the reason we're not talking about arterial or venule, we're looking at that capillary bed because, once again, this is in small vessel. If you remember, a characteristic of vessels are that they're made of smooth muscle. And that smooth muscle is going to be able to contract, vasoconstrict, vasodilate. There's also muscles that are going to be involved in kind of having its own kind of sphincter that's going to squeeze off the blood supply to that region. So this is going to slow blood flow. That's key. It's going to keep you from having a major hematoma. So this is going to be triggered by um, the blood vessel wall and pain receptor reflexes. So in response to those things, you're going to have this vascular spasm, and this is going to occur for about 30 minutes or so. So it's a temporary reduction of blood flow. You're like, why not forever? Because you're not losing anything downstream for that forever. Instead, this is a temporary fix, and your body is doing other things. And so imagine um, that it is triage until like the team that's going to fix gets there. And we'll talk about those teams real soon. So this allows time for the actual platelet plug to form, essentially putting that hole in the boat that you got. It's going to actually permanize that and fix that with the blood coagulating in there. Another thing that's going to have here is serotonin. Serotonin will be released as a result of the platelets. The platelets are releasing the serotonin, and this is going to help with vasoconstriction. All of these things, vasoconstriction, vascular spasm, they are majors in slowing loss of blood flow. And it gives time for that triage team to get in there and do its job of creating the platelet plug and eventually getting to blood coagulation, which is our next two steps. So the platelet plug. So inside of our blood vessels, we have just blood forming, and that's no issue whatsoever. We have interstitial fluid that can go back and forth, essentially fueling the liquids of the lymphatic system. But if you have a tear in a vessel and blood leaks out, the platelets, when they get out of the blood vessel, there's a connective tissue that's going to be all around our body, and this is going to be collagen. When platelets hit collagen, that's going to cause the trigger of this plug. And so the platelets are going to like, oh my gosh, we have a traumatic event. We need to start fixing it. Once again, your body is a drama queen. So now that we have the platelets forming this plug, you can imagine, like, let's say that you have lack of platelets, thrombocytopenia. You can imagine how this would be a problem. Or maybe you have something like hemophilia, or you don't really have the ability to have this clotting. You don't have those clotting factors. So platelets, those thrombocytes, are a major player in this role. And this is a whole cascade of events. We'll look at intrinsic and extrinsic factors soon as we go through this. So the most effective hemostatic mechanism is going to occur within 5 to 15 minutes, and this is blood coagulation. You're going to form a clot. You've probably heard all kinds of horrible things about clots, and blood clots can be deadly. We'll look at thrombus and embolisms and things like that in a few slides from now. But ultimately, this is going to start a series of events. And the clotting cascade is going to have two major categories. We're going to have extrinsic factors, those are factors outside of the blood vessel. And we have intrinsic factors that are also going to have mechanisms that are going to be triggered when we have a broken, torn vessel. One of the things that you need in a healthy diet is vitamin K. Vitamin K is going to help in clotting. And people that are short on vitamin K are going to be more prone to hemorrhaging and blood loss. And a person who has continual hemorrhaging can get to the point of having frequent nosebleeds. And it could be just a dietary shortage of vitamin K. And if you're looking for like what's a good vitamin K food source, leafy greens are a great choice for vitamin K. And there are also supplements if you're on whatever, if you're not eating that, this, that, there are ways to get your vitamin K. But it's going to help prevent hemorrhage because the clotting mechanism there. So make sure that you have that because vitamin K is one of those things that you have to have. So in this clotting cascade, there are procoagulants and anticoagulants. This is going to be this balance that's going to help depending on where you're going to have a clot. You don't want too much of it. You don't want too little of it because you're going to have different events that are going to occur depending on the concentration that you have of each one. Now, the star of the show is soluble fibrinogen. This always tangles me, and I know the word so well. So fibrinogen, when it's going to be insoluble, and it's going to help form threads. So think of you have a hole in a boat, and the liquid that's flowing through has debris in it, insoluble debris, that enough flow through, you're going to have some that's going to actually form a primitive clot. And this is going to form this fibrin, which is going to be this insoluble form. And once you've stopped that clot, it's going to keep blood cells from flowing out. And this is going to help further in the mechanism of the clotting cascade. So here is a broken vessel. You can see the endothelial lining, the collagen fiber that's wrapping it. And when the platelets are exposed to that, then you're going to have something to start there. So the platelets adhere to each other and they get really, really sticky, if you want to call it that, forming that platelet plug. So this is going to help control blood loss, and then we're going to have further factors that are going to be coming in. So hemostatic mechanisms, here are the three: the vascular spasm, the platelet plug, and blood coagulation. This is showing the stimulus that's causing it to go, and here's the effect of each one of those steps. This is a great table, essentially the cliff notes of what we've been talking about the last few slides. Here is a blood clotting cascade. Every one of these represents a protein that's involved in this. You can see the break that's toward the top. So this is tissue damage or vascular injury. And then we can see the blood clot that's forming. We can see fibrin that's been activated. So many steps in the cellular pathway of how blood actually clots. So it's called a clotting cascade because one thing causes two things, causes many more things. And so it's very progressive. And as you would guess, this is a positive feedback mechanism. In our body, we're going to talk about two major ones. One is childbirth and one is blood clotting. And here we are, blood clotting. So this is to prevent, so more causes more. It causes more, and then we're good to go. So extrinsic clotting mechanisms. This is outside of the vessel. So where there is damage, you're going to have something called thromboplastin, which is factor 3, that is not found in the blood. This is outside, making it an extrinsic factor. So this is going to cause the cascade of events to occur because we have exposure of those blood, specifically platelets, that are now going to be activated as a result of this. So the activating of this is going to cause the serotonin release. So thrombin is going to convert the fibrinogen to the fibrin. Did you get that? thrombin. Where do you think thrombin comes from? If you're guessing at the thrombocytes, um, as we're talking about the platelets, which are thrombocytes. And when I'm going through these words, and I know you're like, it says platelet, I'm just going to remember platelet because on the test it's going to say platelet. But if you learn the language, the thrombin is going to be like, okay, that makes sense. That it would be a thrombin would be from a thrombocyte. So it's going to convert the fibrinogen to fibrin. Fibrin is insoluble. That's going to help create a sticky area in the vessel to help those platelets get kind of clogged there, forming a primitive blood clot. Once again, a positive feedback mechanism is going to ensue. So intrinsic is referring to inside of the vessel. So this can occur without tissue damage. So this is going to activate when blood comes together in contact with a foreign substance such as collagen. So if you have collagen inside your vessel, you would have some of these issues. So this is in connective tissue instead of the endothelium of the blood vessel wall. This is going to be triggered by Hageman factor 12 inside the blood. So as the extrinsic clotting mechanisms, this begins sequentially activating of several clotting factors. We're going to see a different version, your book's version of the clotting cascade. So eventually we're going to get to factor X. Factor X, as you can go back and study, you can see factor X's involvement and where it is, and you can see in reality we have several different factor X's. We have factor X here, factor X1, factor X2, factor X3A. You get the idea that there are a lot of different factor X's that are going to be involved. So this cascade proceeds and ends same way as extrinsic mechanism with the formation of a fibrin mesh. The fibrin mesh, think of it as cheesecloth. It's not the perfect stopper because things can flow through it somewhat, but bigger things can't. And that's why we're trying to prevent, number one, keeping cells from flowing out. So here is the blood coagulation process, both the extrinsic mechanism and intrinsic mechanism, both the trigger, initiation, series of reactions, the prothrombin and thrombin as a result. Here's your book's version of the blood clotting mechanism, several different steps as you go through, ending in a fibrin clot. So here's the stepwise sequence. I won't be asking like what happens after step 4. I won't be doing that, but you can get the idea and the appreciation of this is definitely a very involved process. So the fate of blood clots. After a blood clot forms, it retracts and pulls away from the edge of the vessel, and it's going to squeeze out the serum from the actual clot. So what is the serum? It's going to be the plasma minus the fibrinogen and most clotting factors. There's something called platelet-derived easy for you to say, platelet-derived growth factor. This is when you have a break. This is going to cause your body to make we need to make more cells to fix this area. So growth factor is going to promote cell formation. It's going to trigger a cell to go through mitosis, the cell cycle, and generate a copy of itself. Platelet-derived growth factor is going to do a lot of the same concept, but it's going to be generated from platelets, and you only have platelet-derived growth factor going when there's a broken vessel. And so this is a message just for the blood vessel community of we need to fix this spot only. So in late game, the fate of the blood clot, where that fibrin was, you have something called plasmin that's going to come in and essentially break down that, dissolving the clot, which is great for it not becoming a problem or accumulating. So sometimes there are abnormalities, and you're probably familiar with some of these. So let's go ahead and talk about all of these to put all of them in your tool belt. So thrombus. This is an abnormal blood clot, and it's going to form in a blood vessel. Embolus is a blood clot, but it moves. These become very dangerous, and they can become deadly. Very common. Thrombosis. Thrombosis is where it's not only a thrombus, but it's going to be in a vessel supplying a vital organ. So if you have a vital organ and there's a blood clot blocking flow there, that would be a thrombosis. And so it's a specific type of thrombus. that is blocking. Now, once again, it is not necessarily, well, it is not floating around your system and blocking a vital organ. It is just a clot in an area that's going to a vital organ. So it is stationary. All right, an infarction. This is something that you oftentimes hear with myocardial infarction, as in a heart attack, but this is going to be a blocked vessel, and the tissue that is on the other side of that vessel that was supplied by that tissue is going to die. And so that blocked blood vessel is going to be infarction in general. So this is a big major category, but usually you hear about it most due to death of heart tissue, and as it throws troponin as a byproduct. So you can do blood draw and quickly see like, oh yeah, we have an MI right here, myocardial infarction. All right, an embolism. An embolism, this is once again pointing back to the embolus. So this is going to be a blood clot that's going to travel, and then it blocks an organ. The most common one that we hear about is a pulmonary embolism. My brother-in-law died of a pulmonary embolism, and he had a minor surgery, and he had a blood clot that broke free and traveled to his lungs, blocking blood supply to his lungs. And then a person can't properly oxygenate, and so you suffocate while you're breathing in and out. You just can't catch your breath. I would imagine it would be a pretty terrible way to go, because those moments where you're living and you're suffocating while you're breathing, the terror that I think that would accompany. All right, so arteriosclerosis. This is something that is so prevalent in the US due to our Western diet. And this is where you have the accumulation of fat on the inner linings, and this is going to form a different kind of clot. So this is a common form of a thrombosis, but this is, once again, a thrombosis is going to be blood supply blocking a vital organ, and you see this in the heart all the time. And it's the motive of why we're doing, bypass surgeries and putting in stents and things like that. It's causing the vessel, which is occluded, and causing it to spread out. So here is a normal artery. You can see the artery has a lot of musculature with it as the different tunics. And inside this big yellow open space, that's the lumen. Lumen just means the hose, a hole. So take a garden hose, cut it in two, look down the barrel. The empty spot that's in the middle, that's a lumen. It's the lumen of a garden hose. And this is the lumen of the blood vessel. And take a look at this one. This has plaque buildup, and this is from the inside of the artery wall. Notice that we have the innermost lining is still there. So it's not like it gets on top of it and clogs, kind of like a clogged drain. Instead, it would be on the other side of that inner wall that's here. And so just going through and scraping it out, you think would be a medical procedure that would be invented by now. And that's why that's not the case. So going in and spreading it out with a stent is a common process here. Or if it's completely occluded, just go around it. Occluded means blocked. All right, deep vein thrombosis, DVT. Deep vein thrombosis. Let's just stop and think about what we're saying. Deep vein. This is going to be interior, not exterior. And deep vein thrombosis, you're going to have problems with your extremities. It's like low areas. So blood clots are going to form due to stagnant blood. Let's say that you just sit for 12 hours for whatever reason and not really move. A typical scenario would be on an airplane where you're just sitting there for long periods of time. And on an airplane, you can't really move much. It's like, hey, I'm just going to go exercise a little bit and go. I mean, your exercise could go to the bathroom, but for the most part, you're not going anywhere. And it's a major inconvenience and irritation to everybody else. In case you're wondering if they're irritated, yeah, it irritates me when people have to get up, move around. So this clot forms due to stagnant blood. People that are obese have a much higher likelihood of having this. So this is mainly in femoral or popliteal veins. Popliteal is referring to the knee region, deep veins of the pelvis. And so we're looking at the lower half of the body. Serious complications of the deep vein thrombosis is a pulmonary embolism. No surprise there that as the blood sets, it It can coagulate and then travel and then block blood flow, gas exchange ultimately, in the lungs, leading to a person suffocating. So this occurs with prolonged period of immobility. Flight is an example. So symptoms of deep vein thrombosis. This is the important stuff to me. Deep muscle pain, cramping, redness, swelling, dilation of surface vessels, this phlebitis. So whenever you look at somebody and they have the spider webbing of these vessels on the surface, this should be telling you like, hey, we may have a deep vein thrombosis. And if so, you're at high risk of having a blood clot. And you're like, oh my gosh, what can you do? Well, you can get the blood to be thinner, is one. You can increase exercise. And by the way, increasing exercise, it seems like that's always the answer. And as much as we want to like, oh yeah, just do that. I think everybody has been told by their doctor, you need to increase your exercise. And if not, congrats to you. You're the exception to the rule, because most people, they say like, hey, how about, are you exercising for 30 minutes a day, at least 4 times a week? What do you mean by exercise? Going for, walk a couple miles or going for a jog. No. Well, you might think about, and so they're telling you this to save your life. They want you to still exist. Deep vein thrombosis is a threat to your existence. So even though you sit on the plane for hours, it may be days or even weeks until that's actually breaking off, floating through, causing the embolus. So preventative measures, anticoagulant medications like heparin and other blood thinners, compression stockings help with the blood from settling, and exercise during travel. And so as you age, this becomes more and more of a threat. And also, if you're heavier, this is more and more of a threat. So if you're on a plane, whether you have to go to the bathroom or not, get up and go to the bathroom. And while you're in the bathroom, bend and move around a little bit. Get your lower extremities up. And I know it's not pleasant, but guess what? A lot of existing isn't pleasant, and it's just being an adult. Um, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes you get to do stuff that's just like, I guess I do this now. Yeah, you do. So stretch. You don't need to be seen by anybody doing it. Just go to the bathroom, do this, stay healthy. All right, so prevention of coagulation. Smooth lining of normal blood vessels discourages the accumulation of platelets and clotting factors. So there's a few things that are going to be involved in this. Prostacyclins are going to be involved in this. This is going to keep the platelets from sticking. There's also um, the fibrin absorbs thrombin and prevents the clotting. Is another thing. We have antithrombin. It inactivates thrombin. So many of these things, including things like basophils, which remember we talked about those being so few, but still they're going to stimulate things like heparin to be released, as is mast cells, which is going to be its own form of anticoagulant and blood thinner. So these are things that inhibit blood clot formation. All right, so here are some inherited disorders of blood: chronic granulomatous disease, erythrocytosis, factor V Leiden, hemophilia, and there's several types, hereditary hemochromatosis, polyphyra variegata, sickle cell disease, and von uh, Willebrand disease. So you can look through and see how each of these things have a target mechanism that they're working on, as we're starting to understand how our body works, our fluids, that connective tissue, how that works and how it affects these different things. All right, guys, this sums up probably the hardest section. I'll be back soon with the different blood groups, blood types. All right, I'll see you soon.